Be going live.
All right, awesome.
We are live. So, hello, everybody out there in Facebook. I am Marcia Sivek with BeProvided Conservation Radio, and I am here today with Julia Madden Fulk of the Pacific Grove Natural History Museum. So, hi, everybody. And we have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about the Western Monarch Butterfly. And we're going to be talking about how awesome they are and amazing they are, but also the challenges they're facing. And we're going to learn especially like what the Pacific Grove Monarch Sanctuary is doing to help with their survival. And Julia's going to give us a little presentation about monarch butterflies, and then we are going to take questions and answers, we're going to take questions and hopefully give you answers. And after the presentation, so hop on and say hi, or let me know if you have any questions, and we'll answer them after Julia's presentation. So, welcome to the show, Julia. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on, Marcia. I'm
Yeah.
really excited to talk a little bit about monarchs and how the museum is involved in monarch conservation and education.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
excited to learn. They're one of my favorite animals for sure. I love it. So I'm gonna let you take over and talk a little bit about yourself and what you're doing, and I'm sure that's part of your presentation as well. So if you want to go ahead with the presentation, we can get started, and I'll get that in there.
Great, sounds perfect. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right. Yes, thanks again for having me. My name is Julia Madden Fulk, and I'm the volunteer coordinator at the Pacific Grove Museum of Natural History in beautiful Pacific Grove, California. I also included my email here in case we don't get to all the questions, or if anyone has, any questions after this presentation or the interview, you can always reach out to me. I'm happy, to talk with you or to answer any monarch questions. Just to give you kind of an intro to myself, I'm actually not a scientist. I went to school and studied history in UC Santa Barbara, but I came back to my hometown here on the peninsula and worked at the museum after school and was lucky enough to be able to learn a lot about our natural world around us here, and especially about Western monarch butterflies. First, a little bit about our museum. We are one of the oldest natural history museums in the US. We were founded in 1883, and we're here right at the tip of the Monterey Peninsula. Our mission is to inspire discovery, wonder, and stewardship in our natural world. And we do this through many ways, mainly education. We have programs for adults and kids. And we do have our exhibits here in the physical museum. So we often take students out on community science trips, whether it's to the ocean or to our local watersheds. We have things like Science Saturday, which are monthly activities for kids to be able to explore the museum and get to know their own local natural history a little bit more. We also have community science projects with volunteers who monitor animals like the beautiful black oyster catcher bird right there on the right. And we're just really lucky to be in this biodiverse hotspot here on the peninsula. So we see a lot of beautiful animals, migratory birds coming through, wonderful spot for native plants, and we get the monarch butterfly. So monarch butterflies have probably been making their annual migration down here to Pacific Grove and to other spots on the California Central Coast for hundreds or thousands of years. They really became popular in our culture after a book was written in 1914 about the butterflies visiting here in Pacific Grove. You can see an old print there on the kind of right corner. And so we have butterflies are just very important to us in Pacific Grove and to a lot of places here on the Central Coast. They are charismatic, they're just stunning to watch fly around, and they're really special insects that are great indicators of our natural world and of the health of our ecosystems. So just kind of a brief intro to monarch butterflies and their migration patterns and how they reach the overwintering sites here on the coast. We often think of Mexico and Michoacan, Mexico, when we think of where butterflies migrate to, but there's actually two populations of monarch butterflies. They are the same genetically, so there is some kind of cross-section and interaction between the two, but they're mainly separated by the Rocky Mountains. So the eastern monarchs move up through North America on the eastern side, go to the northeast and north, and then when it gets too cold up in the north there, they make their way down to Mexico in a long migration of thousands of miles. Our butterflies that we see here in California are from the western population, so they don't make as long of a migration, but it is still a very long one of, I think, 500 to 600 miles, although it can vary. So we see them here in the wintertime, and then they make their way up in successive generations through Northern California, Oregon, Washington, a little bit of Nevada and Idaho. And then once they get to those northernmost places, the summer generation makes their migration all the way back down to the Central Coast. So it's an amazing feat of nature, and we're just really fortunate to be able to see their migration and to witness their overwintering here on the Pacific Coast. And they come here to Pacific Grove and to other sites because we're kind of a perfect Goldilocks temperature. We're not too cold or not too hot. So they're able to stay and kind of roost in the trees in clusters often of certain overwintering locations. And these are places where they can have a water source. There's not too much wind, and they still get a little bit of sun, but it's not so sunny that they want to start mating and making their migration. So it's kind of a spot for them to just sit and overwinter for a few months from around November to February. From around November to February. So it's a few months here in the Central Coast before they make their way back up. So the Pacific Grove Museum has been involved with monarch interpretation here at our local sanctuary, which is about 5 minutes away from our museum. We do a few different things in the sanctuary, one of them being docent interpretation and tours. So we have amazing volunteers who learn about monarch butterflies, their life cycle, migration, and behaviors. And they talk to guests who come by the sanctuary. So we'll get a lot of visitors from all over the US and even the world come through, and our amazing docents talk to them, teach them a little bit about monarchs and how we can help conserve them in the future. We also do field trips. So we'll have elementary school classes going to the sanctuary, learning about insects and monarchs and the importance of pollinators. And then we also do community science. So we have monarch counts at our sanctuary, mainly every week during the season from around November to February. And we also do counts at a few other sites here in Monterey County. And the Monarch Grove Sanctuary in Pacific Grove is one of a few public overwintering sites on the Central Coast. There's also Pismo Beach, a little bit south of us, Natural Bridges in Santa Cruz, and I think a couple others that are open to the public to really go and look at the monarchs. So we do 2 main counts with volunteers leading the counts. And I want to give a shout out to one of our longtime volunteers, Connie Mazzotti, who's done a lot of the counts here at the sanctuary and has taught me and my colleagues so much about monarchs. So we have the Western Monarch Thanksgiving counts and the New Year's counts. And through these 2 counts, over the span of the 2 weeks around Thanksgiving and the 2 weeks around New Year's, we're really able to understand more about the population, how many are at these specific sites, as well as the loss over the season as storms come through and the population often diminishes a bit by the end of the season around New Year's. And we also do weekly counts in the sanctuary. So that way we're able to really have specific data and long-term data that we can use to understand monarchs. And we can also share it with the public. So during the monarch season, we will put the numbers up on our website. So people planning to visit the sanctuary can look and see, about how many monarchs are currently overwintering in the monarch sanctuary. And it's really amazing. These Thanksgiving counts are long-term data, and we have data going back to 1997 about how many monarchs have been in the sanctuary. And so the counts as of 2021 have shown a really dramatic decline since the 1980s, one of 99.9%. So we have seen this downward trend for a while, and it's really a devastating one to kind of witness and to see it in person, as the number of monarchs overwintering have drastically declined in our sanctuary, but also all across the Central Coast. And to give you kind of a most recent update, this past season, we surveyed 246 sites across the Central Coast, all the overwintering sites, and only 1,914 monarchs were counted. That's down from hundreds of thousands and even a million or so in the 80s and 90s. And I also included the address of the butterfly sanctuary. If anyone wants to go check it out. It's not the season right now, and we don't really know what next year will bring, but it is a great place to learn about monarchs. There's interpretive plaques there, and there's other wildlife as well, like deer and local birds. So a really great place to see the interactions of nature here on the peninsula. I also included a chart here where you can see the New Year's count numbers as well as Thanksgiving counts for Western monarchs. You can see that the number of sites surveyed has gone up, and the populations counted has gone way down in the last few years, but especially looking over a span of decades. So to give you a little bit of insight, I pulled up the numbers from the Thanksgiving counts over the last few years, a couple examples here in the sanctuary. So in 1997, the first year that we did these counts, we counted 45,000 monarchs just in this small sanctuary where they overwinter. By 2019, which was my first year working here at the museum, we counted 642 as the highest number seen throughout the season. And in this last season, in 2020/2021, we actually did not count any clusters. And so for counting, volunteers and museum staff go out early in the morning, around 7 or 8, before the temperature reaches above 55 degrees. And that's because when it gets to that point, monarchs can fly around and start to flutter around the sky. But before that, in the morning, they're roosting in trees, and so it's much easier to count them. But yeah, as I mentioned, we didn't see any clusters this year in the sanctuary. And butterflies have bouncy populations, so they can really go up and down, and they're very sensitive to small changes in their environment and habitats that make them an important indicator to study. So because we can see small changes reflected in their populations, it's important for us to notice these changes in population and take note on what we can do, to better our environment and their habitat. And I wanted to briefly talk about what caused this decline and how it can be reversed. We can go, more into detail on this in a little bit, but it's essentially a perfect storm of reasons. So we can't really pinpoint it on a few different things even. It's kind of a big mess of things, from habitat loss and urbanization, both at overwintering sites along the coast and breeding grounds inward or inland. Climate change also has an effect, as warming temperatures has caused monarchs to migrate down here a little bit later and leave a little earlier. Pesticide use is always not a good thing for insects and can really negatively harm monarchs. And parasites can be another factor. So there's one called OE, Ophriocistis electroschira, which is one that can be found a lot of times on tropical milkweed, which doesn't die back every year. So parasites can stay alive and infect monarch populations. So mainly habitat loss, urbanization, but there's so many other little reasons that factor into this decline. So as humans, we have the tools to make changes and reverse this decline. And as a result, we can protect monarchs and other pollinators and insects, as well as even ourselves. So, going up the food chain from there, we really have an obligation to make these changes to better our environment and to help our monarch populations. So I listed a few things. Some of them are, easy ones that you can take steps to do in your everyday life, like limiting insecticide use and buying organic produce when possible. Other ones include planting a native plant garden. If you have a garden or a yard, start planting native nectar plants, which will be beneficial not only to monarchs, but to other bugs and insects, as well as birds and everything on up from there. And native milkweeds, we do advise that if you are over 5 to 10 miles away, it's a good spot to plant native milkweeds. If you're too close to overwintering sites, focus on the native nectar plants. And whether you're near or far, native nectar plants are just a great way to go. You can also volunteer in your community. So we have Western monarch counts like the ones we do here at our sanctuary. There's also other projects like monarch larva monitoring, milkweed mapper. There's the Western Monarch Mystery Challenge, which is every year from around, I think, February to April. And it's keeping track of where we see monarchs as they're leaving their overwintering sites. So it's always good if you see a monarch, take a picture of it, post it to the iNaturalist app if you have that, or send it on to the Monarch Mystery Project. Monarch, yeah. And I don't have their information here, but I can look it up and include it or send it later. But it's a great resource and a good way to kind of understand where monarchs are going. So there's always community science opportunities and ways that we can really contribute to better understand monarchs, see where they're going, and count them. And then the last thing I put was just to spread the word. So tell your friends about monarchs and what they can do to help. Call your representatives, ask what they're doing for monarchs and other pollinators. And it's really important to, hold our government accountable and see what they are doing in regards to monarchs and, of course, other pollinators and insects. And so I wanted to include here priority action zones. This was made by the Xerces Society, which is a wonderful resource that has information about monarch butterflies. They also work to conserve other invertebrates as well. Here you can see that the first priority, most important places are the overwintering sites here along the coast and the first stopover zone. So this is important to plant early season milkweed, so the monarchs leaving the overwintering sites have places to go and places to lay their eggs and mate. And then second priority are also protecting and planting native milkweed a little bit more inland and east, as well as native nectar plants on the north coast. So wherever you are in California, there's things you can do, even if you're in other places outside of California. Look up monarch groups in your area or what milkweed is native to your area. And you can do this on Xerces Society. They have great resources on different species of native milkweed and what you can plant in your garden. And also Monarch Joint Venture is another resource that has a lot of information on monarchs and how you can help. So we say plant native, plant nectar, plant now. And this is my last slide. I just wanted to include a little QR code and a link because our volunteers over this past year made an audio tour of the Pacific Grove Monarch Sanctuary. So if you're looking to learn a little bit more about monarchs, you can, screenshot, I guess, or click the link there, look it up on your computer. And it's a good way to be able to take a little virtual tour through our sanctuary, learn about monarchs, their amazing life cycle and migration, as well as more details on what we can do to help. And then I also included here the names, Xerces Society and Monarch Joint Venture. Those are two great science-based resources that we go by here at the museum. And there's a lot on their websites if you want to learn more about monarchs. So that's kind of a quick presentation that I have. I just wanted to do sort of an intro to what we do here at the museum, but we can talk more in depth about any of these things if there's any questions, or if Marcia has any questions as well.
Yeah, I haven't seen any questions come up yet, but thank you, Julia, for that. And Nicole in Michigan did make a comment, and hi, Nicole. I know Nicole, and she mentioned that she's a proud pollinator garden owner in Michigan, and raising monarchs for over a decade in Michigan. So thank you for doing that, Nicole. And so that brings me a question. So there's Eastern and Western monarchs. I don't know if you can answer this because we're out in California, but are the Eastern monarchs in such a decline, as much as a decline as Western monarchs? Or are they seeing a drop in numbers?
Yes, they are seeing a drop. I'm
Okay.
not sure of the exact numbers, but I do know that there has been a decline in recent years as well. So
Okay.
both kind of populations are parallel in that way. But the Eastern population is just a little bit bigger, or I mean, a lot bigger in numbers than the monarchs we see here on the coast. So it is a very drastic change and very low numbers of monarchs here.
Mhm.
But they are seeing, similar trends on the East Coast.
Wow, yeah, 99.9% decline here is so drastic. And that's, just numbers dropped since 2017 from your chart were amazing. Very sad to see, unfortunately. So, oh, Connie also commented, plant native, plant nectar, plant now is a great message, great presentation. So,
Oh, thanks, Connie.
happy. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a great one. Some of the staff at the museum have that on their email signature, and
that's a
it's just
great
a
one.
great motto and a good reminder of what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and like back to the number decline too. We were talking a little bit before the presentation about the endangered species list. So they're having a
Mm.
really difficult time listing the monarchs on the list. But they seem like a good candidate to be listed. Can you tell us any updates on that at all, as far as what what
Yes,
may happen?
so there was a petition to list them by Xerces Society and other organizations um, who have been advocating for them to be listed on the endangered species list. Unfortunately, they declared, I believe, sometime in early spring of this year, that monarchs were warranted but precluded from the list, which means they should be there, and they really check out for all the kind of check boxes to be on that list, so they can start conserving them in a way that's with the government leading it and being able to make those changes kind of from the top down.
Right.
But it was precluded because there are a lot of other animals and species ahead of them on the list, and not really enough resources to put them on there right now. So it's kind of in a limbo. I think it's probably going to be reevaluated, but I haven't really checked up on that recently. So
Okay.
unfortunately, we were hoping that they would be included on the list,
Yeah.
but even though they aren't, it's still even more important to really speak up for them and um, do things in our own lives that makes a difference to help bring them back and conserve monarchs.
Definitely. Yeah, so it's back into our hands, and it's a sad commentary anyways that there's so many more animals in front of them. Just seems
Yeah.
to be the state that we're in, I guess. But I do have a question for you. Nicole asked, in Michigan, they have a problem with gypsy moth infestations. The solution is always BTK, which I'm not sure what that is. Hopefully, you know, which is a threat to pollinators. I understand that we need to protect the trees, but what would be a safe alternative? Can you answer that or um,
I guess I don't have the authority to answer, what
okay,
would be an alternate solution. I'm guessing BTK is a pesticide,
that's
and
what I
yeah,
think too. Yeah.
pesticides, and especially neonicotinoid pesticides, are very harmful to monarchs and other small invertebrates like them. So I don't really know the answer to that, but that is too bad. So I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
I don't know too much about the gypsy moths, but I'm writing that down so I can
Yeah. Well, maybe
do that. So
somebody from, the Michigan end of it as well, if they're listening, maybe comment and answer in the comments.
yeah,
And we can look that
great.
up for you, Nicole. So, yeah, thank you. It's a good question, though. So,
Hmm.
and speaking of pollinators, so today is National Bee Day. So, is that correct? Is it National Bee Day? So,
It is National
I
Bee
wanted to
Day.
say that we deliberately planned this, but I just found out about it, so it's kind of a good, good coincidence that we had this today. So
I
anyway,
know, and it's great. It's a good reminder, to look up your native bees and what bees
yeah,
are native to the area around you. We'll often see bumblebees in the museum garden or just around the Central Coast here, but there's so many incredible bee species that deserve to be protected as well. So pollinators at large are very important to us and really benefit as well from native plants and native nectars.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Oh, I have my cocoon shirt on today too.
Oh,
Right.
perfect.
Yeah.
We
It's got the
actually have that
monarch
one
on
in the
the back.
museum
Yeah.
store. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I wore it today. But anyway, it's like all old and worn out. But yeah. Um, but yeah, also wanted to, we keep mentioning native plants, and it seems like, so when I go to a garden store locally, I'm not always guaranteed to probably get a native plant, correct? So we really have to be knowledgeable of what grows in our area and what would help them out. And hopefully the garden store can help with that, I would think. But um,
Yeah, I know it can be tricky.
mhm.
A lot of times the plants that you'll see in your local garden stores won't be native. But you can always ask your nurseries to stock the plants that you're interested in, stock native plants and native milkweeds if you're a little more inland from the overwintering sites. And there's a few good native plant nurseries, around here on the Central Coast. So you'll usually find one, but it can be a little bit trickier, less accessible definitely than non-native plants.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that, we can still get tropical type milkweed or plants here, and I believe you said that they carry parasites that are harmful to the butterflies. Is that correct?
So, tropical milkweed is often what you'll see at your local nurseries or Home Depot, Lowe's, that sort of thing. And because they are from tropical places, they don't die back in the winter. So there's a higher chance that parasites survive on tropical milkweed because native milkweed will naturally die back in the winter
Okay.
and then spring forth in the spring or early spring. So parasites like OE can stay on this non-native milkweed and potentially infect monarch populations as they use it.
Mhm.
And milkweed, non-native milkweed, can also kind of bring in monarchs who are should be migrating monarchs and cause them to disrupt their migration. So they can become resident populations that will stay on this milkweed or in this general area and keep coming back to it. So if there is OE or parasite spores on this milkweed, the percentages will get higher and higher, and it's just detrimental for a monarch population.
Yeah, yeah. And you talked a little bit about their hormones getting disrupted. Is that all part of that? Is that?
Yeah, so that's another thing.
Yeah.
If the milkweed is too close to overwintering sites, we advise people to not plant it closer to 5 to 10 miles from an overwintering site. So,
Wow.
for instance, I'm here in Pacific Grove. I've got the PG overwintering site about 2 minutes away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I were to plant milkweed in my backyard, it could potentially draw the monarchs from the sanctuary and bring them out of their sexual diapause. So for the
Okay.
months that they are overwintering in the sanctuary, they go into this state called sexual diapause where they shouldn't, be mating or starting to migrate away. They're kind of just hunkering down for the winter until it's February or March. But more likely kind of early February now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so if there's milkweed, and it's a sunny day in December or January, and it's too close to the sanctuary, it can cause the monarchs to start kind of using up their energy and laying eggs on it, or even kind of starting that migration path. So it's
Wow.
not really, natural to how the migration would work because a lot of milkweed doesn't historically grow close to sanctuaries or close to overwintering sites, I should say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know because I live about maybe 8 miles from the coast of Santa Cruz. So I would probably just concentrate right on native nectar plants in my yard. Is-
Yeah, and since
Yeah.
you're, 8, that it's closer to 10, so it's not super close, but
Yeah.
it's more just if someone's within like 5-ish miles of an
Oh,
overwintering site, then yeah, we really stress native milkweed plants that the monarchs can kind of drink from and, get energy during the time that they're overwintering.
yeah. I am reading questions as we're doing this too, if I look distracted. So Nicole mentioned that BTK is a chemical that kills gypsy moth and it's sprayed aerial methods, and so it's difficult to control where it ends up. And she also mentioned you need to be aware of particular store and their usage of neonicotinoids. I can never say that correct. There's very little transparency. So she just wanted to
Mhm.
comment that. So,
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. That is a really good point too.
yeah.
I didn't think to mention that, but yeah, a lot of stores use, nurseries can use these uh, neonicotinoids or other pesticides on their plants. So
Hmm.
definitely, ask before you buy and try to get plants that don't have not parasites, pesticides. I always mix up the two in my mind.
Yeah.
And yeah, just do kind of your research and due diligence to hopefully avoid getting plants that have pesticides on them. But yeah, thank you, Nicole, for that comment.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. And so what are some amazing facts that you can share with us about monarchs? I mean, just the incredible journey and migration they do, I think is pretty fascinating. But
It,
yeah, any other facts that you know?
yeah, I mean, just to go into the migration a little more, it's
Yeah.
amazing for so many reasons, especially thinking of such a small insect being strong enough
Mhm.
to make this trip and navigating back to the same overwintering sites generations later than the ones that had stayed there last. So it's often the grandkids or great grandkids of the monarchs that left the overwintering site who are the ones to return. So, they've never been there before. But they biologically know where to go.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing kind of feat of nature to witness.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, yeah, how long does each one travel in the leg of the migration? Like what is their lifespan during this migration?
Yeah, so I might get this a little wrong, but
Yeah.
to the best of my knowledge, it's a few generations making their way up, taking off from maybe Pacific Grove or Santa Cruz,
Hmm.
and they'll go a little bit inland. And it's about a month or so that each one lives, or maybe a little bit longer,
Okay.
laying eggs, and then the next generation uh, emerges and flies north. So I think it can be like 4 to 5 generations that are slowly making their way up north, and then the single generation comes back down through the migration and overwinters at the sanctuary. So
Okay.
often the ones returning will have, tattered wings and
Hmm.
be really skinny and tired after a long journey. So they'll have to kind of just hunker down and rest for a few months, hopefully get some nectar plants so they can refuel a little bit, save up their lipids before mating and dying, and then the whole process starting again.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And they're one of I think we talked about this and we didn't know the answer for sure. Maybe somebody else out there knows too, but I think they're like one of the biggest butterflies. Or their body seems so big compared to others that I see. Um,
Yeah, and I don't
yeah,
know for sure, but I think they're definitely some of the biggest ones that we see.
yeah.
And I also just thought I've seen one, the morning cloak butterfly around here that's also pretty large,
Okay,
maybe about the same size as a monarch.
okay.
Um, but yeah, they're really big butterflies. And I was mentioning to Marcia before we started off that the way they fly is just beautiful and seems kind of more direct. I don't think it really is much different than other butterflies, but they're just larger, so they almost look like birds sometimes when they fly. But
Yeah, like they
yeah,
have
they're
a
beautiful creatures.
path. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think we were talking a little bit too about another fact that they're not really preyed upon by birds very often because they taste terrible. They're kind of toxic. Why is that? Is that from milkweed? What they
Yes, so
eat?
milkweed
Yeah.
has toxins in it. I think it's called carotenoids or something. Carotenoids. I don't think I got that exactly right, but it's this toxin that is just naturally in milkweed.
Yeah.
And so it's a natural defense for monarchs when they're caterpillars and they come out of their egg on a leaf of milkweed, they just start chewing. And so as they're eating this milkweed, these toxins become a part of them. And it's a great natural defense that they have, evolved to have,
Yeah.
and their bright orange and black colors are warnings of this toxin. So you'll often see a lot of other butterflies that have this pattern or have the orange and black coloration
Mhm.
because they're trying to mimic the look of a monarch, in hoping that birds and larger, I guess, insects even don't eat them. So things like painted ladies,
Oh yeah.
viceroy butterflies, um, red admirals, those are ones that look a little bit like monarchs because they're trying to just not get eaten.
Yeah.
But monarchs actually do have a toxin in them. So we have an exhibit in the museum where it shows a taxidermied scrub jay munching on a monarch, and then the next frame, it's throwing up. So it won't kill them, but it'll be a warning, and then they hopefully won't go
They won't
back to
do it
eating
again.
monarchs.
That is so true.
But we did have something interesting in the sanctuary a few
Yeah.
years ago where a squirrel was picking off monarchs from their clusters. So they were clustering out on a branch, and a
Wow.
squirrel was reaching out and slowly kind of plucking off monarchs and eating their abdomen. So I actually have a couple pictures. I can
Oh
share my
yeah.
screen real quick for you.
Yeah, that'll be great.
And I didn't get to witness it. It was before I worked here, but I wish
Let me
I
share
saw
that.
that. Let's
Oops, let me
see.
see if we can get us off of here. Oops. Sorry, I'm just learning this here. Okay. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So there he is, the culprit.
Wow. And he didn't,
And you
yeah, and he kept
often
going back for him, huh?
yeah, he kept going back. And so there's
Wow.
the clustering monarchs like below him there in the cypress tree. And
Yeah.
he was just going through them and eating them. And so from what I've heard from descriptions from volunteers who saw it, it was just like zombie monarchs because they had their abdomen eaten and they were just kind of there on the ground.
Oh no.
Yes. So it hasn't happened since. But just an
But
interesting kind of side note or fun fact about happenings in the sanctuary.
yeah. You get every now and then you get a cheeky squirrel that that can eat toxics. Butterfly.
Yeah, I know. I don't know
Um
how they can do it. But
I have a couple comments too that were made too. I'll just read them if that's all right.
yeah,
Connie mentioned in California, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has a 2018 regulation that does not allow handling of monarchs without special permits. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Yeah, that's great.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Connie, for mentioning that.
Yeah.
Yes, don't touch any monarchs you see. That's a good warning.
Yeah.
Actually, here in Pacific Grove too, we have a city ordinance where if you are seen, touching or kind of interfering with monarchs, you can pay
Mhm.
up a big fine. So,
Oh,
yeah, we don't want to mess with monarchs or really handle them.
okay. Wow. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Even moving them out of a path or something, is that all right? Yeah. Probably
Yeah, I
not gonna.
think I don't know.
Yeah.
I would just not do it. I don't want to get fined.
I know I shouldn't have asked that question. Anyways, and Nicole also mentioned that many people in her area tag butterflies as a way of tracking. I didn't know they could be tagged. There have been
Yeah.
many reports of butterflies making it all the way to the West Coast. So they're actually traveling across. Wow.
Yeah, it's a great way to study their populations.
Yeah.
And we don't do tagging here in California, at the overwintering sites anymore, but they do tag Western monarchs up at University of Washington.
Okay.
So they will tag them kind of at the top of their migration. And there's a really specific protocol for tagging monarchs, but there's a little tiny sticker that you stick on their wing, when
Oh,
they're kind of folded. And so then as they migrate down here, people are looking at monarchs in the trees and they will often see, well, not often, but if you're lucky, you'll see a little tag of a monarch and be able to go to the website that they have on there, or use the identification number to find out where it came from. And so it's a great way to understand where monarchs are going. And I believe that is how we figured out a little bit more about the populations kind of intermingling.
yeah.
So, they also do tagging in Arizona and other places in the US. So it's a great way to see where the monarchs are going and, how they're behaving and that sort of thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't think they would actually make it over that Rocky Mountain and divide there. But that's great. So, Connie also mentioned they are in the glider family, and with the toxins, do not have to take the crazy flight patterns to avoid as many predators as other butterflies. So that makes them
Okay.
not do that little, yeah, fluttery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'll often see cabbage white butterflies in my garden and they're just going all crazy all around
Yeah,
trying
they
to
look like a
avoid.
crazy wind blowing them around or something.
Yeah, it's almost like a random movement. So
Yeah.
thanks, Connie. That's good to know.
Yeah, like I mentioned before we started this presentation, I was watching a phoebe in a palm tree with a monarch a couple years ago, and the phoebe was trying to get close to the monarch, but it looked like the monarch was actually like chasing it off, like it was being territorial or something. And I'd
That's
never
one monarch.
seen it be aggressive like that before. That was amazing. So I don't know if that's a natural behavior or, but it knew the bird wasn't going to mess with them or eat them probably. So, but
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, so at the Pacific Grove, are you guys you're doing in-person things now, in-person training, and are you looking for more volunteers as summer comes in or
Yeah. So we hadn't onboarded volunteers for a while just due to COVID. We weren't
yeah,
sure when we were going to be able to be open, and I didn't want to bring on volunteers and then have nothing for them. So
right.
I am figuring out ways to bring on volunteers. Hopefully, do a few trainings. I don't have anything planned yet, but if you are interested in volunteering, we've got um, our Monarch program. You can do docenting in the sanctuary. Monarch counts if you're really an early bird and can get up at 7 a.m. to go count monarchs in a freezing sanctuary.
Well, it's still cold.
Um,
Yeah.
and that'll be, later in the year from around November to February, seasonal volunteering for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have docents in the museum as well, garden volunteers. So we're definitely, always taking in volunteers and accepting applicants. So more details to come about future trainings. But yes, we're getting back to in person, and it feels good to be able to safely bring back, limited volunteering and opportunities for our volunteers.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, and the just getting the education of all this information that you have to offer monarchs and everything else is so much better in person, I think.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
more
and we did a lot of virtual programs and videos while we were closed, but
yeah.
just being museum, nothing beats being able to walk in there and experience the exhibits.
Exactly. And I know that you have some events coming up. We talked about you do have an event Saturday coming up. I don't know if you want to share that information, but feel free
Yes, I
to.
would love to.
Yeah.
Yep, little event, not anything large. We're kind of doing some smaller things at the museum
Yeah.
for the near future, but we will have a falconer come in and do a little bit of a presentation this Saturday. That's the 22nd from 11 to noon. So he'll be in here with his peregrine falcon, just kind of showing off what he does.
Wow.
And then next Saturday, actually, we'll be having Science Saturday, which is a monthly event. And the theme of May is Water Wild. So, all about creatures in our oceans and watersheds. And if you have any, young kids, it's a great way to be able to do some activities. We'll have outdoor activities available,
Hmm.
and we'll actually have the Monterey Museum of Art come do an art activity in the backyard. So,
Oh, great.
and they're open now too, so it's great.
Yeah.
Some local collaborators, and that event will be from around 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., I believe. So
Okay.
most of the day. And these days we're open Fridays through Mondays, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So a little bit shorter, in hours and in schedule than we were before the pandemic, but we're kind of just easing back into it.
Yeah, we'll get there. So that's great. Yeah. So wonderful. You guys have such a great program. Hopefully I can make it up in the next couple weekends or down to visit you guys. But
Yes, yeah, you'll have to come visit.
yeah, that would be fun. I love falcons too, so that's really yeah, and just everything
There's
nature. But yeah, so do you have any other facts you want to share with us or any other information? I know we both have to head out here pretty soon on our time limit, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank you for having me,
Hmm.
and everyone who is watching and commenting. It's really great to talk about monarchs, and I'm really always learning, but they're just incredible creatures. So it's really important for us to do our part to help conserve them and bring those populations back up, as well as just in helping monarchs, you are helping other insects and pollinators and everything on up from there. So
Birds, yep.
uh, yeah, birds and things that eat birds and
Yeah. Yep.
we really need that biodiversity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just happy to be here. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm maddenfolk@pgmuseum.org. And
Great.
yeah, it's just been great to chat about monarchs with you, Marcia.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Julia. I really appreciate it. It was a wonderful presentation. And yeah, I've just been wanting to learn more about monarchs, especially here in our area.
Mhm.
And I grew up in Michigan as well with monarchs. We used to have so many, and just it seems like kids don't know about them right now.
I know
Unfortunately.
it's true. I often hear from people, a lot of people who come into the museum and they say, when I was a kid, there was our whole field in the back was full of
Yeah.
monarchs and we'd see them everywhere. And so it is sad to have that difference now where people don't see them as much.
Hmm.
And you can't really see them as easily, and it's just definitely a hard situation, but there's always hope, and humans can really make a difference in what we do individually and together. So yeah, I just encourage everyone to think about what steps you can take in your daily lives. Maybe plant a couple plants in your garden, or buy organic if you can have the means to. I know it's a little more expensive too, but
Right.
even just talking about monarchs and learning a little bit more about them yourself is making a big difference.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I hope that we start seeing more monarchs coming in this year. Um,
Mhm.
when will they start coming in? I wanted to ask that question. Do you think we'll start seeing them this fall?
Yeah, so it's usually around November.
Okay.
It can be as early as like mid-October where we start seeing some,
Okay.
but they're usually kind of settled in overwintering sites by November.
Okay.
And the highest numbers can usually be observed around like late November or early December. And yeah, last year, we didn't see any clusters in the sanctuary. Some people saw a few, individual monarchs flying around. So they were there just in very small numbers and not really in our overwintering sanctuary. So it's kind of a mystery to know what will happen this year, but I hope that we'll get some, back in the sanctuary and in other overwintering sites here in California.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So, yeah, well, thank you so much. And yeah, so everybody out there, go buy native plants and nectarine, native nectar plants, and do what we can in our backyards to bring these guys back to our area. So,
Definitely. Plant native, plant nectar, plant now.
thank you. I was gonna say that, but I'm like, I knew I'd screw it up. So yeah, thank you.
My motto.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, we appreciate your time. And if anybody has any questions, just leave them in the comments, and maybe we can get to them after today, after it's gone live. So thank
Well,
you,
that sounds
everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Marcia, and for all you do on
Thank
your
you.
show.
Oh, thank you. Have a great day.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you. You too.
you're welcome.
Goodbye.
Bye, Julia. Thank you. Okay, I'm good.